name's John Hall from Right Here Pens in Shrewsbury, and in this video we're going to be looking at fountain pen nibs and how they work. And with no further ado, we'll take a look at one. Okay, then we've got a few fountain pens here. We're going to use this one to go through the basics. So, I have a pen here. It has a cap, has a barrel where the ink is usually stored one way or another. We have a section, which is the bit you hold on to, and inside that you've got part of the feed, and you've got another part of the feed coming out the front here, and sitting on top of it you have the metal part of the nib, we usually call just the nib. There we go. So what are the parts of the nib? Well, there's the shoulders either side here. There's the slit, the breather hole. Either side of the slit are the tines, and at the end you can probably see a little ball of stuff, and this is called the tipping, and it's usually made of a very hard metal, often referred to as the iridium. Not usually iridium these days, but it's something very, very hard. And this is what actually is in contact with the paper. So there's nothing steel touching the paper in most nibs, and nothing gold either. So what makes the difference between the steel nib and the various other materials is what's happening with the tines back here. But we'll go into that in more detail later. But for the time being, we're concerned about how the fountain pen works. And there are basically two processes at work. As I've said, the ink is held in the barrel. In this case, it's a converter. It would also take a cartridge, so the ink will be in there. Now the force of gravity, if you're holding the pen in the normal direction, will take it down towards the tip. Okay, so that's what gravity does basically. But you need something that's going to regulate the flow, and to do that we have various bits and pieces inside the feed that will do that. So let's take a look at the inside of a pen nib. Now they're not all exactly the same, but they all follow the same sort of principle. So here we go. This is a pressure fit, which means it's just, the nib is just held in, the feed is held in by the mechanical pressure of pushing them in nice and tight. And a point to make is that you should always push them in nice and tight. If the nib wobbles about at all, the various processes, which are not complicated but have to work perfectly, will not do so. So here's the nib. Okay. The ink starts its journey towards the nib. There we go. Through these grooves here. Okay. And further down and further down and further down, you will see that there is quite a broad channel down the middle there. And that has two important roles. The first one is to direct the ink down towards the nib. The second one is to allow a bit of air back in the opposite direction, because obviously if the ink is coming out, sooner or later you're going to start to get a bit of a vacuum developing in whatever it is that's holding the air, and the ink will stop flowing. So that's a very important tube there. And the ink is directed onto these fins down at the bottom. There you go. It's a good view of them. And they're called lamellae, like the little sort of finny things on the bottom of a mushroom. There we are. And looking at the top of the feed, we will see, I hope, that there is another groove down there. And that directs the ink towards the nib. Now, Here's the nib. This one I fear has seen better days, but is used for demonstration purposes. So let's just see if I can pick this up. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the feed sits just underneath the nib. And it's very important to line this up properly when you're putting your pen together. You want equal amounts of distance all the way around the feed, so you can see equal bits of nib towards the end. You can fiddle with it a little bit, so the closer to the end of the nib the feed goes, the wetter it will probably write. And if you pull it back a bit, that will make it a little bit drier. But what's going on with the feed is the ink is coming up to the top there. It's being drawn probably by capillary processes and gravity to some extent. And then being drawn down again by capillary process to the tip, the writing tip. And that's it really, apart from the fact lots of things can go wrong. So, if the slit here is too wide, you won't get capillary action and you probably won't get any flow of ink down there. If this slit at the top is blocked, same sort of problem. And if there are any problems here, you might have interfered with ink flow or a vacuum forming behind the nib. So we've got two basic processes working here. We've got gravity bringing the ink down onto the feed, and we've got capillary action moving it around the feed, helped by gravity. But finally, we have capillary action moving the ink from the feed down onto the paper. And that's how it works. Okay, what's the point of all of this then? Well, basically it's a flood control mechanism. As you know, if you get very heavy rainfall, you will sometimes get a flood. However, if you have a floodplain onto which all that water can flow, you probably won't. And what these various grooves and lamellae and slits and so forth do is slow the rate of flow of the ink. If you just had the converter or cartridge behind it, you would get a very considerable flow, probably only controlled by the fact a vacuum would form as the ink came out, but that's going to cause a lot of blots various ways. So basically the ink flows down through these in a gentle controlled sort of way onto the nib, and again the flow is controlled, and apart from slowing the flow and giving a decent steady flow of ink, it also means you've got plenty of ink to keep the pen writing. Now this, as I said, is a pressure fit, which means you just shove this in nice and tight and it should work. Now you need to, there we go, put it back in tightly. You need to fiddle about a bit sometimes to make sure that you've got it lined up properly, because these aren't always round. There we go, that's got it. Make sure the nib goes in nice and tight, and that should be okay. There we go. So that's the pressure fit. The nib holder is actually fixed inside the section. Many pens these days use screw-in nib units. So here we go, screw-in nib unit. Always loosen off or take off the converter if you're using one, and then you just unscrew. With a piston filling pen, the unit will come out. You won't have to take the converter out or anything like that. But the important thing is that inside here, you've got all the processes, all the bits and pieces that were in the feed that I showed you earlier. And there's your nib, and there's the front end of the feed, just to demonstrate that that's the case. There we go. Other ways of doing it include, well, here's the Lamy Safari, but they use the same approach everywhere. Now, the good thing about this is that you can actually change the nib, the metal part, very, very easily. Pulls off quite easily, fits back on quite easily. The problem is that you cannot get the feed out, so you just have to take my word for it that there's the same stuff going on in there as on the feed I showed you earlier. Actually, it's not entirely true that you can't take them out. You can, but you can't get them back in again, in my experience. Not quite sure how they do it at Lamy. One day I might go and find out. Who knows? Well, thank you very much for watching. That's my first attempt at doing videos explaining about nibs. I hope that's made them a little bit clearer. Who knows? Who knows? I'm going to carry on with this series of videos about nibs, and we're going to look at the type of nibs, metals used, all that sort of thing. So expect another one coming along when I've recovered from doing this one. Thank you very much for watching.